Hey, Frank.
How we doing today?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, right on.
Another episode of Perspective Shift.
Yes, it is.
Ready for a great week?
Yeah, I guess so. And I am ready for a good week. Yeah, I'm always ready.
I am so excited for our speaker today.
You know what? I'm surprised we didn't talk about him sooner.
Yeah, me too.
But, hey, things happen when they happen.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
You
So,
want to let us know who we're talking about?
yes. Today,
That's a segue.
we're going to be diving into Mr. Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
I've heard it pronounced Eckhart Tolle,
I like Eckhart Tolle.
Tomato. It is what it is. But
Yeah, I asked him one time, do you want to be called Eckhart Tolle or Eckhart Tolle? And he goes, it doesn't matter.
yeah, honestly, that sounds like a response he would give.
Do not label me.
I've been excited to talk about this gentleman too, because honestly, it took me a while for me personally to really appreciate and dive into the content that he had. As far as he's been around for a while. Frank and I were just talking about it. The Power of Now came out in 1997.
Yeah,
one of his huge books. That kind of put him on the map.
Yeah, and then
New Earth followed up.
Yeah, New Earth was released in 2005, and that's kind of when he really blew up, because that's when Oprah liked The Power of Now, and then when New Earth was coming out, she invited him on, and this is kind of when his career, from a personal standpoint, really blew up, because she started having him on the show, and then they did this webinar type of thing. It was one of the first live ones, I believe, because it was back, around probably a little bit after 2005, but I remember tuning into it. I actually tuned into it later. I always watch things when they're not on.
Nice.
Like, remember when Seinfeld came out? I lived in New York, and people were like, watch Seinfeld. I'm like, yeah, I watched it like 10 years after it was off air. But at least it's a funny show. But I didn't have time to watch it when it was on. But it wasn't any less funnier.
That's for sure. So a little bit about Eckhart. Where should we kind of start with him? Where's like a good starting point? He was born in Germany.
Yeah, he was born in Germany in, was it 1940?
I wrote it down. 1948.
48, yeah.
Yep.
So I know, this one story, I've heard a lot of interviews with him, not just lectures, but interviews, which I like hearing interviews of people. I love the lectures, but the interview, because then there's questions you wouldn't come up with or in a lecture would understand to talk about until you get some interviewer. But they asked him about how he came to this conclusion, and he started telling a story about when he was 6 years old. His household wasn't as warm and fuzzy, and it's not just because he's German. I love you German people, but you're kind of cold. No, they come across the way. Actually, not cold. They're very lovely. I'm just joking.
Absolutely.
But he talks about feeling or the urge of depression. Suicide at the age 6.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I didn't get the urge of suicide until I had a girlfriend.
Much later on in life.
Yeah, it was older than 6 years old.
Much later on in life.
Yeah, why would God do this to me?
Not too many 6-year-olds are contemplating suicide.
Yeah, but I'm thinking
sure.
wow, 6 years old wanting to kill himself, and where he found solace is he had his house at the time. He was 6 years old. It was 3 stories. And we step outside. It was doing work on it. It said scaffolding 3 stories up. And where he found comfort is at any moment he could walk up to the top of the scaffolding and jump off and kill himself. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty heavy, real heavy. And then later on in life,
especially for his age.
Yeah, he was in college. Went to Cambridge. And again, in and out of suicide, considering it. And then one day he found himself talking to himself and realized there's 2 of me. And, the one part that says, I don't like this, is observing the aspect of I can't stand this anymore.
Yep.
That thing into itself isn't the part that's suffering. It's the person narrating or the story in the head that starts to suffer. So he came to a conclusion that if there's 2 of them in there, well, one isn't that. One's just a simple observer, and that's who we truly are. And the other thing is just a narrative from who people told us we were. And one of the clips we'll pull up today, he'll discuss that. But and I remember, I was getting ready to tell Mike this. Years ago, when Barnes & Noble, they're still around, but when they were flourishing, they were everywhere. Yeah. Well, I I was in this point of really reading a lot of New Age and spiritual books, and I'm not like to tell you something, I'm not a big reader, but I'm big on information, and obviously at that time you had to read to get information. So people are like, do you love reading? I'm like, no, I just like information, and they couldn't distinguish the difference. I'm like, I know people that will read a book even if they don't care about it because they love reading. I'm like, I don't. I read it because what's going to generate me. So there's a distinction in that. All right. So anyway, I would go to Barnes & Noble, and this is funny. I would sit down at Barnes & Noble and say I was like reading for 20 minutes. I would take a piece of paper out and I would shove it in the book or write down the page I left on, and I put the book back on the shelf. I never bought the damn book. So I'm somewhat embarrassed about that.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So
come back for this later.
Yeah, or I write the number down just so the page. So I did that one time. I put a piece of paper in there, and I came back, and someone must have bought the book, and I'm like, God damn it! What page? I had to read more. So I started writing the number down to where I left off. So I wrote it down. I'm a little slow, so I wrote it down. And but I remember coming in one day and finding his book, The Power of Now.
Do you remember when this was? Like, was this a while ago?
Oh yeah, it was like 2000.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was like 22 years ago.
Yep.
And I remember sitting there reading it, and I was on a wooden chair that wasn't particularly comfortable. And again, it's not a big book, but I completely consumed myself in the book. And when it ended and I was reading it, I wanted more. So I literally got up and purchased the book. I read it in one sitting. And I purchased the book because I wanted to take it home and continue reading it. And it was one of those books that was probably one of the first books I read where from start to finish, I had this uplifting feeling, like a tingling feeling, like there's truth in here. And the way I explain it to people and to myself, it's as if I had written this book myself and knew this, but yet I'm hearing it for the first time. So for me, it was a brilliantly written book that I completely understood, or understood the capacity in which I understood it then. But it piqued a serious interest in me, and that kind of changed the way I started looking at books. There's other books I'd read a little bit, and like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, that's this. But this book continues even from the beginning. He was telling the story about a beggar on the street, and I had nothing for the beggar. But he asked the beggar, and this is a narrative story. This didn't really happen, but I have nothing to offer you. But he asked the beggar, what's in that box? And he goes, nothing. I've just been sitting on it for a year. He's like, well, aren't you curious? So the story, I'm not saying it per se how it was in the book, but he got the beggar to look into the story and realized he was sitting on a box of gold. There was gold in there. Mm-hmm. But the narrative is here, even Eckhart Tolle has nothing to offer other than to look within. And when we start to look within, we find everything we need. But I can't teach someone else to look within them. They have to do it themselves. I can't hold the flashlight for them. They have to do it. But teaching people that everything was within, where a lot of people are distracting us on the outside, well, like, oh, get the car, you get the better thing, you'll feel better. And I'm like, no, those are somewhat consequences of just living life, but that's not why we feel better. And Eckhart Tolle really extremely nails this, articulate, and I think because he came from a intellectual background, he studied at Cambridge in literature and stuff, so he has the capacity to take a spiritual understanding and articulate it really well, because it's very difficult to do. It's like trying to explain a ghost to people to get them to see it in their mind. It's impossible. Well, not impossible. It could be very difficult to do, but he does it with some simplicity, and that's why he's very well known.
Absolutely. And I love that because we're all sitting on our own gold.
There we are.
That's what Eckhart's getting at. That's the point of this is
we are the gold.
We don't ask those questions about within and go within. What's the saying? Everybody's waiting for the world to change. Waiting on something outside of you to change in order for you to feel whole, or you to find yourself. When all along it's always been within. And our real purpose here, is remembering who we are and what we're capable of. And That's something that Eckhart absolutely captures.
Yeah.
Especially in The Power of Now and especially in New Earth.
Yeah, and what's interesting, too, is he makes it very easy to come in. Because what I like about him is I was talking to Karen about this earlier, about this other gentleman. I'm not going to mention his name. But she's like, you know, it was interesting. She started reading stuff about this guy, and she knew before reading about it, he came across very divisive. A lot of people didn't like him. But yet, she was listening to a clip of his, and he was making a lot of sense. And she's like, why are people so divisive against him? I'm like, because he's in your face about this information where an Eckhart Tolle might be soft about it. So people that don't understand Eckhart Tolle, they might just be like, oh, he's a quack. Where this guy is explaining it, and I'm not going to mention his name on this podcast, I might talk about him on another one, is kind of in your face, and he actually forces people to look at the truth, and when they don't, they have to knock him. You know, there's a reason they hung Jesus on the cross, in whether you believe in it really happened or even metaphorically, is because they couldn't stand to know that their way of thinking is wrong, and the only way to get rid of that is by getting rid of the person who's putting it in my face. Now, Eckhart Tolle does it in a way where he doesn't put it in your face, but you have to go there and look at it. Otherwise, you're just going to be like, oh, he's full of shit, this means nothing. And I'm like, yeah, but there is truth here. When you look at it, you find and discover the essence of life. Now, once you understand the essence of life, that's when the outside world and the intricacy of the world with dealing with this, whether it's a job or a house, whatever, become more simplified because you learn to not attach to it. So someone like an Eckhart Tolle isn't saying do any of these stuff, but if you don't start from the deeper understanding, these things will just keep fleeting, which they always will, and your anxiety of how to keep it will grow further and further, which he was, obviously suicide comes from the deep-rooted anxiety of wanting to get rid of it. Yeah, if I always walked around with anxiety, I would want to freaking shoot myself in the head. Yep. You want to get rid of that
A lot of people
feeling.
are in that position today.
Yeah. But when you actually get into what he's talking, the pointer, and he points at it, he doesn't get to it because we have to get to it, but he points in it. And when you look at the direction he's pointing, you're like, wow, this is very good stuff. And then when you actually enact it and start to sit with it and contemplate it, don't think about it, because the thinking mind was like, this is crazy.
Mm-hmm. Well, so for me personally, I was first introduced to Eckhart Tolle, it was like 2014 or 2015 when I had a gentleman at a place I worked, a business I was working at the time, come up to me.
Was that?
This was actually when I was working for the Push agency, and so it was like kind of like a company where we staffed events. And we would staff different, like, multiple events, for, you name it, concerts, motorcycle, Barrett Jackson, this type of, stuff. But the owner of this company actually came up to me, and he took an interest in me and stuff. And he said, hey, I think you would love this gentleman, Eckhart Tolle. You should take a listen at this, it changed my life. And he gave me a copy, and I started to listen to it on audio tape. And it went completely over my head. I was not ready to hear it at the time. In fact, I remember trying to get into it, and I just couldn't. And this was my first time being introduced to Eckhart,
Yeah.
And so I remember that. And I remember, like, the bell distinctly, in before every chapter. Like, I remember listening. This was, like, one of the first books I listened to on audio tape. And I was like, I just can't get into this, I don't get it. At this time, I was very much so stuck in the egoic mind, very much living in this day-to-day lifestyle of, you got to do this in order to accomplish that. And so it never really sank in. And then fast forward, years later when I started to understand these concepts, and really dive deep into these concepts, I found myself going back to Eckhart Tolle's work and seeing the power of what, he had put out. And
Power of now.
Yeah. and understanding, like, oh, my God, this was right in my face. It always has been in my face for years, and I've just kind of been, blowing it off. So I guess what I'm saying about that is Eckhart's one of these people that isn't going to come out and grab your attention. And that's where Frank was just kind of getting at, with the, the gentleman or person he was talking about before. it's not in your face. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You need to move into the work, to really appreciate it and be active and a participant in the work for these concepts to really settle in. And so anybody who's on the fence about, Eckhart, or have never heard of him, it when you're coming from this space, initially when you start to listen to it, it's easier for this material to soak in and be digestible concepts. So that's something that I like to point out. If you already are on the spiritual path, and remembering who you are, then you'll definitely find his work to be very eye-opening and very tantalizing, very unique. These concepts, the way he phrases them, the way he talks about them, isn't like that of anybody that I can just easily name. He has this this way about him that's very genuine, and he's very quiet and very I don't know how to say it other
soft-spoken.
Yeah, he's soft-spoken, but it's like a
well,
you know what I mean? Like,
a lot of
he's not your common
spiritual
teacher.
No, because a lot of times within the spiritual world, you hear this, and there's nothing wrong with what I'm about to say either. But a lot of people talk about this. They do it with the high emphasis, like they add into it, when people really amp up their voice, like a Tony Robbins or something like that, to wake you up. Well, Eckhart Tolle is just very he'll come on stage and be like, "Good morning," and he's just funny. And then sometimes he'll talk and have these pauses, and we're unless you know him, it can make you uncomfortable. Like, did he forget why he's here?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
He's not trying to. He actually creates more space.
He's kind of awkward.
He's only awkward if you're not in that. So we constantly want to bombard our space with stuff. Mm-hmm. So he's like the anti-cluttering, or I shouldn't say anti-cluttering. He declutters, but he's not against it. But he creates so much space in between to realize my words don't explain, but that silence did. And that's how he approaches it. And when you do that, you're like, I get it.
It's in the space.
It's in the space. It's in the stillness. That's another one of his books, Stillness Speaks. And he does that. And what's funny about it is I remember reading his book, and then I got the audio book so I can drive around in my car. It was back when CDs were still around.
Yep.
And I pop it in my car and listen to him. And he's got the German accent and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, this guy's, first, he's dry.
Yeah. Dry is a great way.
But then when the first time I saw him speak, he is funny as all hell.
He's funny.
He's funny because you have to see him, not just hear him, because he'll make these. He reminds me of almost with some of his the way he looks at stuff, like Mr. Bean.
Yeah.
Remember that character? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like he just makes these
weird like that.
Yeah. But it's funny, like he's a squirrely kid.
Yeah.
But he's like, oh, one of the stories. After this story I loved, he tells it after him and Oprah, he came out with the New Earth, and it sold 10 million copies.
Holy shit!
Well, it just shows you how many people are starving for that information, and it was a beautifully written book. But anyway, so now he's on Oprah, so the whole world knows who he is, right? So even people listen to this. I'm like, most people are going to tune in, are going to know who Eckhart Tolle, at least heard of him. Mm-hmm. It's not like we're. Some of our other people we introduced, most people didn't know about. Mm-hmm. But anyway,
it's kind of a household name.
Yeah. So if we'll add 2 more people to Eckhart Tolle's list of people.
You're welcome, Eckhart.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Exactly. Thanks to Frank and Mike. And,
big shout out to Perspective Shift for blowing up my next novel.
Yeah. Well, he starts telling a story where he was always considered to be like a recluse. He liked to be by himself. He's very quiet, introverted type of person. That's just who he was. And once he was on Oprah and all this stuff blew up, he's like, it would get to him. Like, he wanted him to speak, and all of a sudden now it's like, and now people are watching what I do. And he's like, oh, I'm at a restaurant. And people are like, what are you eating? Spiritual people don't eat that. And he's telling the story just like in that tone. And he goes, and now when I go to Starbucks, I have to wear a baseball cap. And it was just funny as hell to me because he was inferring in that situation there is no spiritual way of outwardly living. You're just spiritual within. So if you're drinking coffee or eating a hamburger, it doesn't make you any
more or less.
It doesn't make you any less spiritual than this person that's drinking green tea and eating a salad. Those things are funny. It's not that they're bad, but a lot of times in the New Age world, they try to make this is more spiritual and this is better for you and everything else. And it's like, that's not true. We buy into those. But those are games we play. It's like, is football better than tennis? No. But if you're John Madden, you think so, right? But if you're John McEnroe, you think, nah, you think tennis is better. But physics, well, gravity still works. There's rules and regulations in both sports. There are guidelines or borderlines, right? There's lines and indication of the game. So they both have a similarity. But the game into place and the rules are completely different. But Eckhart Tolle is talking about the similarity. He's talking about the basis of all game, but not the rules and regulations, because every rules and regulations are different within the field of each game. But people get hooked up in the game. It's like someone sitting there telling me about the rules of football as I'm standing with a tennis racket. I'm like, I don't really care. I get a tennis racket, or vice versa. I like both sports. So
the ego is the game.
It is, but the thing is, when we get to understand it, like what I like the way he lays out, when you go from that place of stillness and silence, you then enter the game, because he's not saying don't play the game, but don't play the game from the ego, play the game from the stillness, and you actually become a far greater player. You advance beyond the act of what we call competition, and you go into the act of performance. And that's what we're talking about. He's not saying don't play the game, don't do this, don't do that. But that, if you're doing that and say check, score, and that's all you focus on is the scoreboard, there's no fulfillment there.
I went to college. I got a job. I got the house with the white picket fence. All right, had a kid. Wait, I'm not happy yet.
Yeah, I didn't make it that far yet.
God damn it! Well, this game sucks.
Yeah. Does anyone really want a white picket fence anymore? Is that like from the 50s and shit?
Well, shit. All of our science is from the 50s, so who cares?
I remember
we've been living my classical physics forever.
One of my friends had a white picket fence around his house, and it was wooden. It wasn't like these plastic ones we have now.
Yeah.
And I'll just remember, like every year or every other year, he had to paint it. His parents made him paint it.
That's like the
and
worst.
What a pain in the ass it was. I was like, holy shit. He goes, you want to help me? I'm like, hell no. Get the hell out of here. I'm going to build a tree.
Funny.
I'd rather build a tree house than paint a white fence.
I'm good.
Yeah. And his dad would yell at him if he got paint on the grass.
These are those conditioned concepts that we've just heard for years, you know, that this is the American dream. This is how you achieve happiness. You know, all these weird things that we all live our lives by, these weird stories that we tell ourselves, you know, the Disney shows showing us, you know, the prince saving the princess, all these ideas that we've been conditioned to believe how something works.
Yeah, and it's still
it's all fleeting.
Yeah, and it's all, because even now people are talking about the minimalist. Now people are like, I only have 5 items. Oh, you think that's good? I have 4. I'm better than you. And I'm like, that is nutty. I get it. If you actually live in these formats from the basis of life and understanding it, you'll look around and you'll probably have less stuff than the average person, but you don't base that on more spiritual, because even that is the ego. I'm like, nobody knows. Like, you know, I remember Eckhart Tolle was once asked, like, what's it like to be enlightened? And he laughed. He goes, I have no idea. Am I enlightened? I don't know. He goes, we could discuss enlightenment, and it was kind of funny because he's like, don't put that job on me, like I'm enlightened.
I love that you brought up the enlightenment part too, because so one of the cool things about Eckhart, like his awakening experience, and Frank briefly touched on this earlier, was one very, very different from, you know, my experience of learning these concepts and coming to it.
Yeah, because you don't live in Germany.
Well, there you go. And everyone has their own experience. But what I mean by that is, like, Eckhart, the way he describes his awakening was very much so, okay, he was, you know, in bed, you know, in his head, you know, realizing, you know, who is this voice saying I can no longer stand to be myself? And he was able to disconnect from that voice and for the first time recognize the observer and go, oh, there's a difference between the person observing and then the pain, the suffering, etc. If I can observe this, how can I be that? And from that moment, it clicked for Eckhart. And, from there on out, it was, I get this. For me, it was a much more, okay, I understand that concept, from a thinking mind perspective, but I had to, work into this understanding. It was like a practice. It wasn't a waking up and all of a sudden everything made sense to me.
Yeah, but also too, like when he tells a story, so it turns out, like if I get the story right, he was in bliss for about a week or two, just walking around. But then there came his realizations, like I got to do something. So in that moment, he actually started studying every religion, thinking he would find it in there. And he came to the conclusion it's not in the religion. And it's not that it's not a part of the religion, but you're not going to find it. And it's not disassociated or trying to disassemble religion. It's not about that. Because all religions, like if you have a religion that can keep you in the state of presence awareness, you don't need to find another one. He talks about that. So it's not about disassociating from religion, but so in a religion where people have problems with it, it isn't the religion per se, it's the doctrines, what one must do. And it's, if I'm in a religion and Mike's in the same religion, what he does is going to be different than I. The principles are going to lead me down a different path. But when you try to have everyone enact the same thing, that's where it gets a little weird, and people know that it's just weird. You can't do that,
and we know that because of how it feels.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel right. It
but
doesn't feel genuine.
Do you know he even got into and set in on Scientology?
You told me that years ago. Actually.
I know it was interesting. Yeah, and he's like, he realized, well, this is crazy.
Well, that was designed for the tax benefit.
Now, again, not even to knock.
They talk about that.
Not even to knock Scientology entirely, is because when you look at the aspects of the fundamentals of what they talk about, there's truth there. But once an organization says you have to, in order to get this level, you have to pay this amount of money and we'll teach you. And they do some crazy stuff to get you to see this. All right? And then you do that. But everywhere else, this information comes free. And guess what? You might not need this level. Just like, some people had to be taught piano before they could even hit the keys, where like a Mozart came in knowing it. Yes, he had teachers who advance him beyond the point that everyone does, but yet he was already along the way, so his teacher coming in was a lot more advanced at the time. So it's kind of like that. We don't know where anyone is, but if you were set in, you have to go through this whole process, and you must stay here. All of a sudden, it creates a weird taste in people's mouth. And so certain religions can have that. And I don't know too much about Scientology other than the negative stuff they talk about. But the principles I've heard about, Mike, I follow those principles, but I don't need to, go join I don't know how often they get together for like church every Sunday. I don't know how it works.
Join a Scientology parish or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know how it really works. So I don't want to sit here and knock it, but he even talked about getting into it, and he got out of it what he thought he'd get out of it, but and just left. But and he even did Buddhism, different. Obviously, he was raised in Germany, so Christianity was definitely part of his youth anyway. Even if you're not religious, it's in the Western world, whether it's in Europe, it's very difficult away from Judaism and Christianity because it's woven into our fabric of the way we think. Then he gets beyond the idea of religion, which can then, if you're in a religion, you can look at the basis of your religion and stay within it. You don't need to put a new sweater on, so to speak. You don't need to join a new club, but you can get more fulfillment out of it by looking deeper, and he can show you that. So he doesn't disassociate from religion at all, because he actually went into all religions, and all those religions he looked into all had the same thing.
That's it. And I mean, in religion, it began with a pointing in the direction, of finding yourself. Like we all come to this world now, and like we think like, oh shit, we're just like here to work and we're here to survive. And that thousands of years ago, they knew we came here to search for something more, this whole spiritual, this whole other side of us, this whole being, this whole experience that we're calling reality. And then along the way, years after years of years, we've twisted it into this weird like economic machine is why we're here. And that's why a lot of us, feel so tired, feel so burnt out, is we're not here to work and pay bills and die. We're just not. That's not what we're here for. And so religion allows us to, get into that experience of what more is out there. What is this experience? Why am I here? The thing about religion is, because it's man-made and, has been little things, added to, subtracted from, etc., to control a group of people, and to keep order. Those things carried on and, became part and parcel to these, different religions. At the end of the day, what they're all pointing to is there is something more to this experience.
Yeah.
And there's something more for you to remember, and that's who you are.
Yeah, and all religions talk about the mystical side of it. Like, so when you go to church on Sunday, whether it's a synagogue, a mosque or a church, they're talking about the mystical, something unseen. Because if they talk about something seen, that's a physics class, it's a classic physics class. So you can actually show that, but you're going beyond the point. So people either show up on a Saturday or a Sunday, depending on what religion they are, and to some degree, it gets them through the week. But what we're trying to get here is you don't stop trying to get through the week. Be present in the moment now, and the power of now explains that. It's not that you're not going to work or have a job. It's just that you're not going to look at it from that vantage point anymore. Like, I have to do this. I'm like, no, it's an experience. We came here to have experience. I'm not here to tell you what experience anyone should have. But as far as I know from deductive reasoning as best I can, I'm not the best at it, but a lot of people I talk to look at it and I'm like, hey, what's the purpose of life? And the purpose of life is to give it meaning, or the meaning of life is to give it meaning. And essentially, it's an experience. And we're actually realizing, okay, if I follow these principles and do this, the experience is so much more pleasure if I don't. So there is this empirical understanding of, I don't want to say right and wrong, but truth and then half-truths. All right? So there's empirical truth, and then the rest are half-truths. When it be half-truths, my opinion on this works is a truth for me. But it's a half-truth because it's not going to work for everybody else, or it may work for some, but even the people work for, they can argue of it. But when I become present in that moment, in the state of being in now, all of a sudden, I don't need any of that. And the truth is, I just feel alive. But yet now I want to get back on the field and play the game. Yeah. So he shows you how to, it's almost like, how do I set up for the pregame? Like, what do I do? Everyone knows that plays a game, they psych themselves out. They get into it. So Eckhart Tolle literally teaches people how to be present in the moment now prior to going to work, getting involved in conversation, getting in a car. When you're present, you're actually in the complete safest place. So if you're driving your car and people, how do I stay present? Well, notice the material on your steering wheel. That's it. That's present. It's not more deep than that. And when you're starting to notice that, you're more alert and more focused, and the likelihood of you getting into a car accident is down to zero. But most of us get in the car and we're telling a story about what happened last night, what's happened last week, or what's going to happen when I get to work, and you're not even here. And you wonder why you get into a car accident. But if I'm touching the steering, I'm like, oh, this is leather. Oh, there's something on the leather. Oh, I got gook on it. That's still present. You're being aware of it. Now, once I start saying, what the hell's wrong with me? Now I start getting...
The thinking mind.
The thinking mind comes over, yeah.
The egoic mind, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and he presents this story really well. And the way he talks about it, it's just soothing. And again, like Mike said, I remember when I first saw this to him, I'm like, did he forget what he was about to say?
I just remember being like, dude, this dude's so awkward. And I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? And it took a while, or it took me already kind of knowing these concepts to begin to appreciate him.
Yeah, it's almost like, like a really talented musician will play emphasis onto it. Because you could take, say guitar, and say I take any chord. Say I take an E chord, and I just thrash as fast as I can. It's got a sound. But then if I take it, but I'm holding the same rhythm, saying I'm doing like 16ths really quick, constant, all of a sudden it becomes noise. But Eckhart Tolle will take that E chord and he'll do 16ths and drop it down to 4s, and then drop it, go up to 8, go down to 4, go back to 16. He takes this cadence to where that's art. There's some deviation in it. So when he talks, he'll go on a story, he'll tell this, and then he'll, and like he create, the greatest songs have these shifts in them. Greatest movies have shifts in them. Greatest, stories have shifts in them. But most of us are always trying to get the story. Blah, 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 blah. I do it a lot too.
We all do.
Yeah. But yeah, when I'm watching, I'm like, oh, wow, I like his cadence. I like how he doesn't just talk very slow. Sometimes he does, and sometimes he gets into the story, and then sometimes he just sits there and stares at you. Mm-hmm. And you're like, what did I do wrong?
Let's dive into them.
Okay, which video do you want to watch first?
Go ahead and throw whichever one you want on it.
All right.
Let's just go
ahead.
All right,
let's check this one out. Here we go.
They always fall into place, right?
Here is Eckhart Tolle.
But if you look back on your life, and I look back on my life, it's always been challenging. There are brief moments when it's not challenging, and that's great. But you know very well that life won't leave you alone. It'll challenge you one way or another. If you look at the world situation, it's the same. There's all kinds of challenges in the news. First there were the communists, there was a Cold War, and then there are suddenly other huge challenges arising, and it goes on and on. So in the words of the first sentence in the book called The Road Less Traveled, which I never read because the first few sentences were so good I didn't need to read the rest of it. And the first sentence is, now this might go against certain New Age beliefs, and it might at first sound negative, because the first sentence is, life is difficult. That doesn't sound very inspiring. And then the next sentence, although I don't remember it literally, says, and if you know that, you're completely okay with the fact that life is difficult, then it's no longer difficult. So that's all I read. Because that says it all already. How does that work? How is life, when you know that life is difficult, it's no longer difficult? You try to work that out. Well, here's the explanation. It's really only difficult if you think that it shouldn't be difficult. Because then you're in continuous resistance to things and people and events. But once you accept it's an essential part of life of being difficult, then whenever the next difficulty arises, you say, oh, there's life again, being difficult. In other words, what does that do? It creates an acceptance of what is. If you carry around the assumption in your head, it shouldn't be difficult, there should be no difficult people and obstacles and problems, and things should not get cancelled, and plans should not be interrupted, and nobody should fall ill, and then people shouldn't die, certainly. That's a travesty. These things should not be, they're all dreadful. There's an underlying assumption things should go smoothly. And so, of course, sometimes they do go smoothly. But the irony or the paradox is that once you recognize the fact that life is difficult, that life is not meant to make you happy, it's not meant to make you unhappy, but it makes you unhappy if you have a wrong attitude towards life. Happiness comes with accepting the fact that challenges are an essential part of the evolutionary process for all life forms.
See, that's what we're talking about, the brilliance of him, like, telling the story about how we read the book and didn't need to read beyond it.
I read the first sentence.
Yeah, that's all I
And
needed.
that's all I needed.
Yeah.
Oh, that honestly, I love that clip. That's why I honestly selected that one. Was I wanted to show his weirdness and squirreliness and all that. He can still, like, he's funny.
I had
funny.
a similar experience to him with
Oh,
that. Yeah? And I mean this, like, so years ago when I first started meditating, I get all these books on meditation, and I would do these things, and I remember getting this book said you had to get into lotus position and hold it. So I'm trying to work on my form, and unless I was leaning on the wall, I couldn't sit that way. So it was like really painstaking. I'm like, I got to do it. I want to meditate. And I would go through all these practices. One would tell me this, the other tell me do that. And it was very arduous and just really laborious. And I'm like, this meditation shit sucks. Well, one day I was walking in the bookstore, and right on the table, it was a book on meditation. And I opened it up, and the first sentence says, there is no right or wrong way to meditate. And I never bought the book or read it. I just like, fucking A. Nice.
This is what I was
so
looking for.
So I meditated the way I felt comfortable. So yeah, I sat in lotus position, but I had pillows propped up. I was like to a point where I couldn't even feel my body. It wasn't aching and stuff like that. And it felt good. And I just started meditating from there. But everything else was like a yoga class. I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like, yeah, but it was funny because when I heard them tell that story, I'm like,
That's all you could think of.
yeah, I remember just looking. I'm like, this is like, oh, what the rest of the book say? I'm like, I have no idea.
I didn't need it. I got what I needed to.
The author, if he wanted me to read the book, should have put that at the end. He fucked up by telling me in the beginning,
by giving me all I needed in that first line. No, but he captures such a truth here in this clip, and to hear the way he explains, like, that's what where our mind gets lost, or where we get tied up, is we have this grandiose idea and picture of how things should be.
Yeah. And
anything that isn't how we pictured it.
Well, how things should look.
Yeah, look, be, feel, touch,
like,
all that.
Yeah, because I want to clarify this, and these are just words and definitions, but be, or the state of being, is a feeling. So how things look can change a feeling. Like, I could look at a painting and I could be like, oh, and some people are like, I don't get it. Mm-hmm. But the state of being is the state it's who we are. We're beings. We're just being. But then we go and act that. So it's kind of like circumstance, situation don't really matter. They don't make us feel good. Like, life isn't here to make you feel good. You just feel good. You happen to be in life. And it's a brilliant statement where he said, obviously he emphasized on it, but he didn't come up with it. But life is difficult. And once you know that, it's no longer difficult.
In fact, it's only us saying it shouldn't be difficult.
Yeah, people, like, if you were swimming in the pool and I'm like, oh, this is nice and relaxing, and all of a sudden then you decide to get out and run, you want the same feeling that you had in the pool. I'm like, you're not. You were weightless in the pool. But you don't have to worry about drowning as you're running, Somebody
once, I forgot who it was or where I heard this quote, but the quote was, life does not get easier, you get stronger. And I thought that was a really good quote, because we're all on this trajectory where we think, okay, I just got to get enough money to make myself comfortable. Then I can just, like, relax, right? Mm. That's like what everybody's all running around trying to do. And the series of events that happen through all of our different lives and, experiences, etc., never are going to allow for us to just have these consecutive consecutive years of no issues or no problems or no stress and all this type of things. As much as we are trying to imagine that and create that, that's not what is, because life is a balance. It's a yin-yang, experience. This is light, dark, dark, light, contrast, hot, cold. Yeah, contrast. That is what this is. And so to think that life should not be difficult is really where we're all going wrong. We're saying this ought not to be this way.
Yeah, how should it be?
Says who? says the ego. And this is what Eckhart's capturing. This is what he's saying. He's like, that mind, you're observing the person saying this ought not to be this way. This shouldn't be this way. This shouldn't happen to me. Who's saying that?
Yeah.
The observer's not saying it. The observer is watching you say that, experienced you say that.
And it's also like, everyone knows this. And what I mean is, but you have to step back and don't realize you're recognizing this. Would you ever want to watch a movie when everything works out?
Oh, gosh,
The
no.
greatest stories were like, how's this dude going to get out of this? How's this woman going to get out of this? And yet, at some level, they are, right? So they set a dire setting, and all of a sudden they have to figure it out. And we go along with the ride because we have what we call mirror neurons. So we go through the experience to a degree in which what's on the film. But somewhere along the line, we forget that we can do the same thing in our every day-to-day life, which is a fractal of another movie. We're just actually on the set. Me and Mike are on the set here, Perspective Shift.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what we're doing.
But yet, later on, you guys will. And so at some point when we record this and put this out there, because we don't do it live, so to speak, you'll be watching it, but yet you'll be like, okay, but I'm separate from it. But yet when I sit here and as I'm talking, in my stillness, in the present moment now, I am separate from the stuff coming out of my mouth. So if I say something wrong, it's not my fault.
I love the thought process.
I remember seeing it at the camera. She's like, you really can't do that.
Nice try.
Yeah, you are responsible. I'm like, shit. All right.
Shit.
Yeah. But when I separate, it's like I almost don't know what's coming out of my mouth. That can be dangerous too. But actually, you have fun with it. But all the situations. But when you create a narrative, this persona is who I am, and this persona, this should not happen. I'm like, well, look at people like at James Bond. I'm like, you watch that because you know he's going to get into a serious ass situation and he has to get out of it. And hey, one of the biggest blockbusters lately was Top Gun.
Oh yeah,
right?
The new one coming out.
Yeah, and everyone was sitting at the edge of the seat when he's like, okay, we have to go up this mountain and zoom down and drop a bomb, and you watch it like he's getting out because it's Tom Cruise, for the love of God, right? But yet, you going along for the ride, and there's this little chance of it might not work out. But nonetheless, it's still a circumstance situation. He's not back at the bar drinking beer, singing songs. That showed you that, hey, this is all cool. Yeah, but tomorrow, we got shit's going down.
Well, why do we disconnect? Why do we say, oh, I know Tom Cruise is going to get out of this just fine? Why do we have the ability? Well, why do we have the ability? And it's because we see ourselves as separate. And we're not separate. You know, it's the understanding and the knowing of, I have that same power. So we take an example like the movie, great example.
Well, you wouldn't be able to notice that because again, the mirror neurons are watching that, realize. But when the movie's over, we forget that's who we are. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying I'm Tom Cruise, but we have the same capacity and ability to get out of it, just like anybody else. Again. Just because I'm watching a fighter jet do all this thing, to me, it might just be dealing with the stuff that's going on at work. Mm-hmm. The event and everything else is the same, but I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm like, I got this.
Correct.
I got this. And then the situation, circumstances are laid out. And when I know I have this in the present moment, when I stay in that moment now, as Eckhart Tolle talks about, I know how to deal with it. But if I'm like, oh my God, I can't deal with it, and it just gets worse.
Well, in fact, there's nothing to deal with because these are all
No.
infinite possibilities of things that could happen, and it's just like us running around with our head cut off, or chicken with their head cut off.
Yeah, people fall into panic attacks not in a situation when they're in. It's heading into the situation.
Yeah, it's
like
the number of outcomes.
Yeah, I would see athletes, especially in boxing, because it's one of those sports where you're on your own, and I have never seen a fighter in the ring, especially after the first round, panic. They were panicking in the locker room, like, oh, I don't know if I can do this, and like, you're doing it, Musicians, same thing before going on stage. You don't see them panicking on stage. It was before stage. So they're panicking over a concept of what may or may not happen. But once they're in the present moment doing it, they're not panicking, Yeah, especially in boxing, you better duck.
Yeah. You don't have time to panic.
You don't have time to panic. You're getting hit.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to take one to the face.
Yeah. So when you stay present, the ego doesn't exist in telling you this should happen, this should happen. You're panicking because you're worried about what people are going to think about the outcome. That's period. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, who cares? I'm like, people showed up to watch me, and see what happens, And when I stay present, I perform better. That's just that's period. And it only comes from the present moment now. And that's why people do, like musicians will do live shows. I know this every time. Every time I come up with a, like on my guitar, I'm like, oh, it sounds good. And I go to record it. I have to do it like 10 times, dude. Like I could come and play that out there seamlessly because I'm actually doing it live. But once I get recorded, I'm like thinking the recording. Because once you capture it, it's captured forever. And in that moment, I'm not present. And all of a sudden, I'm like, shit. And then I have to walk away from it. But it's my thought. Rather than being present, then I learn to be present and then press record. It comes out seamlessly. Because out there, I'm like, why can't it come? Like, because you weren't thinking. You were just being in the present moment playing. But once I start to think about what I just played, it's like, oh, this is not good.
That's exactly
That's when I lose it.
We're making it something.
So the power of now, the book itself, will teach you how to, and that's the beauty of the book. As you read it, don't try to rush through it. Just contemplate it. Read a chapter. Sit down. Read through the whole book, however you want to do it. But as you read it over and over, and even Eckhart Tolle said, he goes, you don't necessarily need to read the book. Just have it next to you, or a book like it next to you. There's an essence to it. Like if you look at the cover of the book, it says Power of Now. Like, oh, I'm present. And all of a sudden this feels good. Well, try to stay there. When you don't feel good, get back to the present moment. It's all that really is, actually.
It's just us,
we
playing games upstairs in the head.
We think there's a later or tomorrow or yesterday. I told you that story about the bar in New York, right?
Yeah. Share this because this.
I might have shared this already, but there was a bar. It was pretty close to the shop I worked in, and once in a while, I wasn't a big drinker, but once in a while I'd go in there, and right when you walked in on the side of the bar, it said, "Tomorrow, drinks are on the house."
Perfect sign.
Tomorrow never came, buddy. Tomorrow never came.
Perfect sign.
It took me 3 days to figure that shit out.
So this doesn't work.
Like,
hey, it's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. It goes, no, it's today. And it's just like, all right, I'm never getting a free drink, am I?
I love that.
Yeah.
That's seriously the truth of a good truth of life, though.
Yeah.
We're always in anticipation of something that never comes.
Yeah.
It's a constant back and forth of, I just got to get through this, then I'll be good. Then we get through that, and then there's something else.
Something else, yeah.
Yep.
Something else.
Let's dive into another
All right,
one.
let's check out another clip from Eckhart Tolle.
There's the level of words and thoughts, and that is necessary. But more importantly, there is that to which the words and the thoughts that underlie the words point. And that is the essence of our gathering here. And that to which they point is the essence of who you are. And the purpose of our afternoon is to either awaken, or in the case of many of you, to deepen the realization or the connectedness with who you truly are. And when I say truly, I mean in the depths of your being, and I mean a dimension that is deeper than your personal history. And most humans are completely unaware that there is a dimension of consciousness in them that is deeper than their personality, their personal self. So they are trapped on the surface level of reality, and that is not a pleasant place to be. You are basically then trapped in your conditioned personality, the person, the egoic self, and you know, somehow, you know that there is something not right. You know somewhere, instinctively, you know there's something so important that's not here yet and that's missing in my life. There's something wrong. And how humans interpret that mentally, what they perceive or feel to be wrong, varies from person to person. One person might say, what's wrong is that all humans don't have the same religion that we have. There's something deeply wrong. So we need to either convert them or kill them. Or other humans say there's something deeply wrong about society. They project it outward. Of course, there's lots wrong with society, but what is society? It's the sum total of the individuals. There's something deeply wrong with my personal history. It's so unsatisfying. Why? Why did so many things go wrong in my life? Things that weren't supposed to happen. I imagined things going very differently. Not all these failed marriage and divorce and all this dreadful suffering, and then there was the illness, and then there was that, and then there were great achievements, and then there were all again the opposite. Something is looking for the next thing to feel fulfilled by possessions, recognition, something missing. There's always something missing. What they don't know is that what is missing, what they look for outside, or they blame others for preventing them from finding it. You can blame entire groups of people for making you feel unfulfilled. It's a very common thing these days, and very satisfying to the false sense of self, because if you can see yourself as a victim, either on a personal level or collective level, that gives you a somewhat satisfying sense of identity, satisfying in a completely non-satisfying way. It's a paradox. You feel good about feeling bad. And the more you can complain about others, and the better you feel, but it's bad. But the ego thinks it's better. And you feel, now you know who you are more fully. It's a fiction. So you can emphasize your victim identity on the personal level to give you some kind of stronger sense of self. Or you can emphasize your identity as the one who is victorious in the world, me. The ego doesn't mind which one. They're both equally strong and equally false.
Yeah, that's good.
I love that clip.
Yeah.
Specifically because he said this phrase early on in the clip, and it was, I wrote it down, a dimension deeper than your personal history. That is what Frank and I are trying to describe every single week on this show.
But we constantly fail.
Well, we're trying to describe the indescribable.
Yeah, it's true.
And that's it.
Yeah.
You know, when you begin to practice these concepts and let go and essentially allow yourself to be in this present moment that Eckhart's talking about, it is a different way of experiencing life. And that's what he means when he says a different dimension. And then when he talks about the surface level, it's living in this very, third-dimensional reality of money, bills, pain, suffering, all these types of, day-to-day activities that we struggle and strive, with. And so to hear him talk about this other dimension is probably the best way to explain how you begin to experience life differently. If you don't like the word dimension, use, experience, because what it is you are just experiencing this reality in a different way. It's not like you just get plopped into a different reality and everything changes. No. You experience what's going on in a much fuller, wholer way of being.
Yeah, and he also mentioned the understanding of this stuff being paradoxical. And I've come to realize that there is tremendous power in paradox. And what I mean is when, kind of sitting out what people think is blissed out and just being in the moment, you're just going to be having no experience. Well, that's impossible because that unto itself is an experience. But it doesn't mean you stop playing the everyday game of going to work or whatever it is you're doing. But when you come from that state rather from the ego, because what the ego can only do is tell us what has already happened. So it knows what's happened. So then it's trying to compare this present moment that's heading in my way to what's happening, and it mucks it up. But when I come from a place of present moment, I have no idea. All of a sudden, I'm more prepared to have a more fluid experience in everything, and all of a sudden, that becomes a paradox. So your experiences become largely better or greater in the field. You're more responsive rather than reactive. Because reactive comes as, if I go do this, this is what should happen. I'm like, no, you don't get that call. I'm like, well, let me do this and see what happens. All of a sudden, when I'm allowing that to happen, I become, and that's the power. I actually come in flow with what's actually happening. I then become in a moment of response rather than moment reaction. So that's where the power of paradox comes in. When you understand, be completely present, and then head into the world. Head into the world completely alert, completely present, completely calm. And all of a sudden your experience becomes amazing. No matter what happens. No matter what happens. Someone throws a punch at you, you're present, you just duck. Or you get hit, I'm like, oh, that was interesting.
No need to get mad.
But we're like, that was not supposed to happen. Sends you flailing, Again, if you're present, the chances are someone punches you unless you're in a boxing ring. Like, you place yourself in these positions when you're not present, by the way. So you don't accidentally walk down a dark alley. Sometime you're stuck on the phone and distracted. Next thing you know, I'm in a dark alley getting mugged. Yeah. But you have to, if you're conscious, you choose to walk down a dark alley or you don't. And I'm not here to blame victims, but victimization comes from the act of not being present. Correct. Otherwise, you wouldn't find yourself in it. In this present moment, you cannot be a victim.
Well, and that's what Eckhart's getting at in this clip, and why I like this clip so much is he explains we have this weird way of living where we think if we are victimizing ourselves and not enjoying the experience and we're hurting and having pain, then we are justified in our grievances. And this is something I've talked about in the past, and I always like to say, there's no such thing as a justified grievance. And a lot of us, will get up on our soapbox and say, this shouldn't have happened this way. Clearly I had it more difficult because of this, etc. And we have these very, very heavy stories and baggage that we carry with us. But it's how we move from these experiences and how we grow and learn from these experiences that change and flip the script, the entire dynamic of this experience that we call life. And so when we have these justified grievances, they are what's holding us back. It's a moment, and Eckhart talks about this. We almost feel good by feeling bad. We feel good that we're not enjoying this experience. Well, clearly, since I'm not enjoying this experience and I'm suffering so much, it's not my fault. And it's that keeps us trapped. It's, don't you see how much pain I'm in? Don't you see how much I'm suffering? Of course I'm not having a great time. I am justified in these feelings. Yeah. And it's like marinating in this sense of lack.
Yeah, he calls that the pain body. So we identify with the pain body. There is a formula where he's talking about when you are in these situations, when you can let go of the pain body, it doesn't mean the memory of whatever happened goes away, but the way you feel about it changes. And when that happens, in the understanding of this formulation, the paradox is it upheaves you into a greater place. It might put you in a place of championing people do that, so this will slow down and stop. Like an Oprah Winfrey's a great example. We use her a lot because she really is, but here was a young woman living in America, happened to be black, and she made it to the top of the ladder. And it's like, it's funny, like when you call it like she was basically in an industry where it was completely dominated by men, let alone a black woman coming in. Yeah. And it wasn't like she was competing against anybody. She was doing something that nobody else could have done. But so the time you're watching Oprah, I'm like, oh wow, and then you hear the backstory. When now she's famous enough to tell the backstory. I'm like, wow, I have nothing to bitch about.
Mm-hmm.
But what she did was, she took her pain body and used it for her good. She would never, ever tell a woman, go out and have this be done to you so you can be where I'm at.
Never.
She would never excuse what someone did to her. She would never try to make excuse for why it was good. It's not what we're talking about. A lot of people take this out of context when I say it. Like, so you're saying it's good? I'm like, no. I'm not saying that at all.
And that's not what we mean.
No, not at all. It was horrific. But how do I take a horrific thing that has happened, can't do anything about it, and turn it around and become present, and you let go of that pain body? It will catalyst into the most peaceful place you ever been if you come to an understanding. And that's the power in the paradox. And I know, I don't know if we have a clip today of Eckhart talking about, but he has talked about the pain body a lot. And a lot of men and women have it, but you see a lot of women carrying around because of the atrocities that's been going on for years, especially living in this society. It's starting to change, obviously, now. But until they let go of the pain body, very little will change. And again, we're not blaming. It's not what we're talking about, because that's a wrong narrative to come at it, because people are like, oh, you see, you're blaming the victim. Like, not at all. Because the true idea of a victim is that when you're a victim, you're unaware of the situation going around you.
See, that's a very divisive way that our country's gone, too, because we'll take these ideas and, like, in anything now, and we'll say, so that's what you stand for, so everything else is, and it's this divide, it's this separateness that's so, whoa. We went from, being on the same page to now just miles apart. It's that is what we're doing with the egoic mind. Yeah. We're saying you can't just, you have to be something. I'm going to define you fully, and you can only be that, and there's nothing else. Yeah. And that's a dangerous place.
You know what it is? It's because I watch conversations about this all the time. I'll sit there and watch people talk about it, and I'll see like a person talking about information that they know. And they'll go and they'll start to say something, and all of a sudden someone, so what you're saying is it's good? And like, that's not what I'm saying. And what happens is, because we live in a soundbite world, you'll take that person out of context, and all of a sudden they'll be demonized for that. And I'm like, but what's happening right now, which I notice, is people are picking up on it. I'm like, and they're no longer doing it. So people right now in the world that are out in the public eye are very careful to how they speak. I pray that they're not scared to speak, because the truth is we're all on the same side. But it's like it's like if Karen was talking and I only heard part of it. So where are we going for dinner? All of a sudden it's like, it's because I didn't listen. I thought she said something else, but it was my inability to get the full story why I was lost in it. And sometimes when people don't get the full story, they like to demean. So what you're saying is you hate women? I'm like, no, it's not what I'm like, I love women. Why would you say that? Because somewhere they want to feel the essence of being right and prove something wrong. But when you hear the full narrative of what I'm saying, it's quite the opposite.
I think a lot of it has to do with like, okay, this concept is unknown to me. I need to bring this back to something, harden this into fact. When we allow ourselves to expand, like, okay, that's new to me, that's foreign. I need to redirect this.
Well, when we get stuck in the ego likes to play the game of right or wrong.
Yep.
But when you step out of the ego, there really isn't right or wrong. There's a full story. And when you listen to everybody, so what happens is the media, people like to get you. Gotcha. Yeah. And I'm like, you really didn't get them because you didn't hear the full story. So now everyone's like, I don't like this person. I'm like, did you ever read him? Why would I read him? I don't like him. I'm like, did you listen to her? No, I don't like her. She's a bitch. I'm like, did you ever read? Why would I do it? She's a bitch. I'm like, how do you know she's a bitch? Mm-hmm. Now, what I do find people out there I do listen to, they come up, they have a point, and they don't really fully make the point. And it's not that the point's wrong. They were just lazy. And I can get that way too. And I get that. And like on the show, that's what me and Mike are trying to do, is talk about points and concepts. We don't always get it right, but when I don't, I admit it. But there are people that just aren't really good at what they're talking about, so they don't do justice to the conversation. And then they'll go up against people that do, and even though what the person's talking about, might not necessarily empirically be true, but because the way they discuss it with more information and more stuff, more like facts is what we call it, they seem to win the argument. I'm like, they might have won the argument, but doesn't mean their point is any more valid than the other person. But the other person was lazy in their, way of discussing it. So all of a sudden now it's like, okay, this whole I gotcha type of situation. How do we look at this good? I'm like, this is the way you look at it, it's good. When I get on the mic and talk about someone, get in front of someone, I have to be very clear on what I say so you can't get me. So I like the person trying to get me. I praise the person trying to get me because I want to make sure you can't get me, because if you can get me, I'm lying, and I'm lying to myself.
Well, we see this a lot in just the realm of politics, especially in our country right now. Just like it's it's the damn Democrats' fault, or these damn Republicans, it's all their fault, depending on which side your fence on.
Yeah.
And we love to justify our grievances and just say, oh, it's the goddamn Democrats, it's the goddamn Republicans. And we do this, and we allow it. We think it's like it feeds our justification of why something is, if this group of people was different, then I would feel better and everything would be okay. Do you know how wrong that is?
Well, it's because, and I get why they do it, because even like you got psychologists that talk about this, and they've been doing so much studies on it, and seldom do you ever hear people argue against it. They might look at it from a different vantage point of how to correct it. But when you're fully in the ego and not in the present moment, like Eckhart Tolle is talking about, the ego loves to be right. So it'll argue, and what happens is you get a charge. You get like this rush of adrenaline. So I get why people do it. But that rush of adrenaline will definitely wear you out. I'm like, there's a more efficient way to go through life. Very, like, because if I talk about something I'm passionate, I'm going to keep going, and next thing you know, like, shit, I got to take a nap. Mm-hmm. But if I talk about a place from the essence of the present moment now, I can go all day long, and I'm not excluding anybody from the argument. And when you do it in a very relaxed state, very present state, and listen, and don't react, it's calm. It's a better flowing place. So when you get more familiar with this calm flowing place, you realize this is way more effective in life. But the other one definitely has a charge. It definitely charges you up and amps you up and gets you going. I'm like, yeah, but how long can you stay in that state before you burn out? And how much destruction are you doing in the time in which you're in? Well, it's because you let the ego take over. Exactly. And that's what Eckhart Tolle is talking about. The ego, when in charge, it's very damning. But when you become present, you don't throw the ego you don't throw the ego away. The ego's coming along for the ride. It's experience. It's like,
we need the ego.
Yeah,
it's
the ego,
part of the experience.
Yeah, but once the ego takes over, we're lost. I think we used this analogy before on the show. It's been a while, but if the ego only knows what it's experienced in the past, what we call the past, you wouldn't want to allow you to drive the vehicle in which you're in, because it can only drive to the places where it's known and there's nothing new gained. But when you allow the presence within us, the higher self in us, it's curious. It will go beyond the border in which the ego would go, and it discover new things. But in that, the ego's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, check this out, check this out. It's recording it, But if the ego was driving, it would just go around in the same neighborhood you've been in, and over. You wake up every day. How's your day going? Oh, it's a hell of a day. It's Sunday. Oh my God, I gotta work tomorrow. I'm like, oh, for the love of God. And when I say for the love of God, I'm talking to myself. Stop. It's annoying. And I imagine that's something like how Eckhart Tolle came to realize. Would you stop talking and say something new? It's like, who just said that? Who just said that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right.
So we got another clip?
We just went on a tangent there.
Hey, that's the point of perspective shift. That's the point of this.
Is there a point?
And if you live in a false identity, a conceptual identity that you allow the world to tell you who you are, you allow the world to determine your worth, so you've stopped thinking, the ripple has stopped thinking. And in that, at first, there is a strange. I'm not thinking about who I am or my problems, and yet what is left here is just a presence. And that means the ripple is becoming aware of a transcendent dimension that is deep. And that is the awakening of the ripple. And that is actually the main purpose of your life, is to become aware of that, because that is the awakening of the human species. And the human species is only one manifestation of the consciousness of the universe, manifesting here as the human species. I'm sure there are others on other planets or galaxies who are also awakening. And your purpose is that you may sometimes question whether your life, there's this weird notion of how do you judge your life so far? A success, failure, something in between. And of course, it's nice to achieve something in this world, to create this or that. But it cannot tell you who you are. It always leaves a sense of lack ultimately behind, even if you can hang on to it until finally you die. And you have to let go, or it leaves you. Either you leave it, or it leaves you.
Yeah, so I like the essence of that.
Me too. I think that's a perfect clip for us to kind of end on too. With you know,
and it really is, because it's not, you're not taking yourself out of the game in this game of life, having experience. You're still going to do everything you do, like we talked about before. You're still going to chop the wood and carry the water, but in the essence of doing it, you're not trying to get anywhere. You're not trying to gain something from it. And if you're not trying to gain something from it, you're not saying, where am I? Where am I? Like, and once you say, where am I, it creates an anxiety, and you stop. You actually, in order to measure where you are, you have to stop moving in the direction in which you are moving. And it's the movement and flow of life that is the feeling of success. But once you go to measure it, you stop the flow. It's a very awkward thing.
And we're constantly measuring.
Yeah, and when you measure, you have to stop something. You know, you have to like put an end to it. And then now you have to pick up momentum to get it. So every time you measure something, it stops the flow of that very thing in which you're trying to measure. And we didn't come here to measure. We did not. We came here to experience or identify with the measurement, right? We didn't come here to do that. And we're learning that. We just came here to have experience. But yet, you know, to experience, like, oh, look what I created. This is interesting. And other people can enjoy it, you know, and when you do that, it's like, oh, it's great. And then it's like, can you write another book like this? It's like, shit, right? It's like musicians have to deal with that shit, right? It's a great album. And I need another one. Just like, I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah. So now the producer's like on their ass about making another album, you know? And also
well,
at the same caliber of the first one.
I think about that all the time, though.
Yeah.
We all think that like everybody in their own industry has like has it better or easier, and we just kind of see like the outside looking in. But guys, behind every rock star is some worried little person saying, "I got to make that next hit song. Otherwise, you know, I'm that one hit wonder." You know, behind
That
every
sounds
movie
like
star.
a lyric of a song. Behind
it?
every rock star.
It is. It probably is.
A little worried child.
It is.
No, it is.
Same with every actor, you know, out there. You know, they come out with this monster film, and she goes home going, okay, well, what's next? This is a very natural human thing that we do, and it's because of how the brain works, and we've created this separate identity that is not us, that we're saying, that we're constantly narrating, and we're saying this is what's going on, etc. And then we start to identify with this character, and it never has been us, and it will never be us. It's a series of mental mind patterns and ideas that we have cultivated throughout life and carried with us, saying, this is who I am. And we're none of that. And so we look at all, you know, these other people, and we say, oh, you know, this is why the phrase grass is always greener, you know, is such a popular statement and is so true. We look and we think, oh, that if I just had something like that, you know, their life must be so great. No, they're going through the same trial, tribulations, etc. Sure, maybe, you know, that actor might be a little bit more comfortable, have a few more pleasures than you do. But I can promise you, you know.
Yeah, but you look at, like, you know, like, especially today, I can use this analogy when you buy a vehicle. Like, you know, you can buy a really expensive vehicle or a very inexpensive vehicle. Basically, the technology and the comfort is very similar. So, you know, when you're in a Hyundai or a Bentley, the outward expression of it, people are going to look at you. But I could still call Bluetooth. I could, you know, put whatever speakers in I wanted. The sound, noise cancellation from the car might be a little bit better in the Mercedes than it is in the Hyundai. But essentially, you know, it's like bouncing all around. Like, if you close your eyes, it's, you know, like a taste testing, would you be able to tell the difference between each car if you're driving in it? And the similarities between the two are very difficult, other than what people know the worth of it. So now it's the ego. But yet, we live in a world right now where it's like, whether you live in a 5,000 foot house or a 500 square foot apartment, you can only fall asleep or sit on the couch that expands it. So one person's like, I got a really big couch. I'm like, yeah, but you're not really big. You know, you're sitting on a cushion on the big couch where the other person's still sitting on a cushion occupying the same space. So when you look at it, it all sounds ridiculous. I am not saying don't get the big house, but don't think you're any better off because you have the big house. Now when I leave something in the kitchen, I'm like, shit, I got a long ways to walk.
I got a long walk.
When I had that studio apartment, I'm like, hey, there it is. And I grab it.
We're good.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. We carry these ideas around, and we say, you know, that's who I am.
Yeah.
But we live our life by the stories. I must do this because, you know, otherwise I won't get that. And it's this constant chase of nothing. We're literally chasing a self-created identity. And when you see this bubble, it pops. And that is you recognizing you are not the ego. You are the observer. You're a witness to all this going on. And it finally clicks and you go, huh, oh my God.
Yeah. And it's amazing. And again, like I'm going to mention again, the paradox is you have, then at that moment you do that, you realize you have the capacity to experience all those, but you might not necessarily choose to. Because if you know you can get anything you want, you don't need to get it to identify getting it. You're like, oh. Now, if you get it, it's because the enjoyment of having it, not because I didn't have it, so now I have it and I can prove I'm better off than I was. I'm like, that fulfillment is very short-lived. Mm-hmm. It's aggravating, actually, because now you got to find more space for this shit.
Yep. And it's a constant chase.
Yeah. So in that place of getting to this place of being present and knowing that you're not supposed to keep score of anything, what will happen is the people around you will notice the fulfillment of your life. They're like, wow, like, what are you doing? It's like, well, it's almost like I don't give a shit. Mm-hmm. You know, I could put it more eloquently, but, it kind of comes across like, yeah, I'm not trying to get that thing. But now those things are easily accepted or easier access for me. But, yeah, I don't need it. Like having this or another house or more cars, I'm like, that seems to be a little more inconvenient for me at this stage of my life than having the amount of stuff I have. Because right now I can do with it. But if I had another house, I'm like, now I got to take care of another house. I'm like, shit, or pay somebody else to take care of it. Like now I got to make, it's like, wow. And I'm not taking this away. People might love that, but I'm just using this as an example. I'm like, it's not, sometimes it makes your life more difficult than make it easier. But I know I can do it, but it's not why I do it. But I can do it now because I fell into this place of not needing it. And it's like, wow, it's weird how that works. It's the paradox of it. Mm-hmm. So the present moment, getting in the power of now, what comes greater than any house or any car or any business is the way you feel. It's this essence like, that's what I've been searching all along. Well, how do you know you've been searching for it? Because you felt it when you were 6 years old on the playground. You had to know it. You had to have the keys and lose the keys to know you're searching for the keys. We knew this as children, and you're lucky if you had a big wheels, you know what I'm saying? You didn't have anything. You had rocks in your pocket and a swing set at the playground, And it wasn't even that. It was this essence that changed everything, and then we've been searching for it. I'm like, how can you search for something you never had? Because you actually are it. You're chasing your tail.
You always have been.
Yeah, so, hey.
Thanks for joining us this week.
Yes, yeah. Eckhart Tolle, check him out. If you don't know who he is, there's a lot of content on there. Again,
he has a lot of content online, too.
He does.
He's got a great YouTube channel, guys. Check him out there.
Yeah.
If you have not read The Power of Now or New Earth, definitely pick up a copy. It's absolutely worth the read.
Yeah, New Earth is definitely a longer book to read, but Power of Now is short. But then he also has Stillness Speaks. He's got a couple other materials because it's what I like to do with him and like other people, but it's just simple reminders. Like just having his book out on my coffee table, I don't need to read it. I'm like, oh yeah, getting ready to yell at Karen. I'm like, shit, Power of Now.
But truly,
actually,
I
put it out there so Karen doesn't yell at me. I'm like, Dave, be in the present moment, please.
See that?
Yeah.
What's that on? Can you hand me that on the coffee table?
It's like, come on, would Eckhart yell at me? Eckhart does not live with you.
Yeah, seriously. But thank you guys for joining us this week. If you like what you heard, go ahead and leave us a comment below or any questions. We'd love to respond to all questions, comments. We'll see you guys next week, and we look forward to it.
Yeah, peace out.
Thanks for joining us.
You got it.